There we are. I hope that's given you an idea of something that you can do during the sermon. The template is available in the link in the description of this video, and also there's a link on our Facebook page. But you can, if you have a pen and some paper, just draw it as well. And as you get to work on that, we'd love to see some of the pictures afterwards, but as you get to work on that, we're going to think more about Daniel 3. So, we're back in Daniel. And for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it. This is the big chapter. And it asks the question, how will they worship and serve God when they don't get the life that they want? Such an important question, isn't it? We need to hear this today. We need to ask ourselves this question too. How will we worship and serve God when we don't get the life that we want? Because this isn't the life that they wanted, I imagine, is it? They've been invaded and shipped to Babylon. They've had their names changed. They've been bombarded with Babylonian culture intensely to a brainwashing level to prepare them for the king's service. And they're only eating vegetables and drinking water for all of this time. This wasn't the lives that they dreamed of for themselves, I'm sure. How will they worship and serve God when they don't get the life that they want? None of us, maybe, have the lives that we dreamed of. There are always things that we'd rather not happen, aren't there? Things that we didn't plan or expect. Jesus tells us in the Bible that there will be suffering in life. Even for Christians, there will be suffering. In fact, we should expect suffering. How will we, as Christians, worship and serve God when things in this world aren't as we would want them? And that's the test for today. That's the challenge from Daniel 3 today. And as the chapter starts, the challenge takes shape. King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue. We're told at the start of each chapter, King Nebuchadnezzar has done something. What has he done this time? King Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 1 invaded Jerusalem. In chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. In chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue. And if my Kids Slot video from last week hadn't fast-forwarded through it, we would straight away be linking his dream from last week with the statue from this week. We didn't focus on the dream last week, but the first part of the dream, if we'd slowed it down last week, describes him seeing a huge statue with a head of gold, a body of silver, legs of bronze, and feet of iron and clay. And Daniel says each of those is a kingdom. The interpretation says each of those is a kingdom. And if we track through the Bible, through history, we can see that the head of gold is Babylon, under King Nebuchadnezzar, and the silver, the kingdom of silver, that's the Medo-Persian Empire, and then comes next the kingdom of bronze, that's the Greek Empire led by Alexander the Great, and then lastly the Roman Empire, the iron mixed with clay. And it points towards a kingdom that God would set up at the end of the dream, that with Jesus as king, and he would come under the rule of the Roman Empire initially, but establishes a kingdom that would last forever, that would never be destroyed. So he has this dream, the huge statue representing the rising and falling of all these kingdoms, kingdom after kingdom, until God's kingdom is established. And Nebuchadnezzar says, "No, I don't like that. No, that's not what I want." He's had his mystery revealed to him. He's had this mystery revealed to him, in his words, by the God of gods and the Lord of kings, the revealer of mysteries, and he says, let me just tweak that a bit. Let me just rejig it a bit. I'm going to build my own statue. I know all about building statues. No one knows about building statues like me. I'm going to build a statue of the dream. I'm going to build the statue from the dream, revealed by you, God, but I'm just going to change it. I'm just going to change it a little bit. I'm going to take your plan, I'm going to make it better. I'm going to make it all gold. So it's all Babylon, so it's all me. And in fact, I'm going to make it look like me. So as we read this chapter, we're definitely meant to identify with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're definitely meant to feel the challenge of living in a world that doesn't always follow God and that sets up all sorts of other gods for our allegiance. We're definitely meant to see ourselves in them, but not just in them. Because before we even get to identifying with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we've got to admit to ourselves that we see ourselves in King Nebuchadnezzar, haven't we? God, I see your plans for my life forming, and some of it's great, but I have some notes. I want to make some improvements. You see, this hard time that you've got planned for me to shape me and to grow my faith so that I can walk with other people when they're going through something similar to that and help them by my experience, I just want to take that out. I don't like that. In fact, you go and have a rest, God, and I'll make the improvements and I'll tell you when I'm done. Now, look, that's making light of it. Of course it is. I know. But we need to see ourselves in the King. We need to admit that if we were planning our lives, we may well have done a very different job. We may well have planned things to turn out differently. And so that question echoes again. How will we worship and serve God when we don't have the life that we want? Will we reshape it like Nebuchadnezzar? Will we put ourselves on the throne? Because that's what he's done, hasn't he? He's already on the throne of Babylon, and now he tries to put himself on the throne of heaven. He makes this statue, which is of him, basically. It represents him, and he says everyone needs to worship it. Everyone needs to worship me. And he gets a worship band together. Did you notice that? All the instruments that he can think of, the horn, the flute, the zither. I didn't know what it was either, but it turns out it's a bit like a banjo. The lyre, the harp, the pipe. Actually, the fuller translation of that last one is bagpipes. Now, don't worry, this isn't saying that bagpipes are evil. We've got bagpipes later on in the service. But we'll be using them to worship Jesus, not to force people to worship a statue. Because that's what he does with these instruments, isn't he? Isn't it? He says, when you hear all of these instruments, you bow down and worship the image of gold. Bow down or die in the fiery furnace. That was the Babylonian ultimatum. Convert, bow down, or die. And of course, the spirit of Babylon lives on through history, doesn't it? It happened in other empires. It happened in the Crusades. It happened throughout history, and it happens now, doesn't it? There are places in this world that say convert, bow down, change your God, or die. And we can go on to websites that talk about persecuted Christians. Open Doors, Release International. We can see Christians being killed around the world for their beliefs. It's also some people's attitude to Christianity, isn't it? Because of the wrong things that have been done in God's name in the past, that's how people see Christianity sometimes. Maybe not die, but convert or be looked down on smugly. Convert or be judged by us. Someone said Christianity isn't an imposition, it's a proposition. That's completely true. Christianity isn't God imposing on the world an ultimatum. Christianity is a proposal from Jesus to the world. I'll be yours and you'll be mine. How about it? God holds his arms out to us. And I pray that everyone will hear that offer, that proposal, and respond. It's open to everyone, but forcing people to take on certain beliefs, that's not worship. That's not love. But here, Babylon is the opposite, isn't it? You are mine, King Nebuchadnezzar says. You belong to me, and if you don't bow down to me, in the words of Lin-Manuel, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. And then the moment comes. The horns and the flutes strike up. The zither player starts zithering. In the midst of this great assembly, thousands of people bow down to the statue. 3 stand up. And they're noticed. These officials notice them, and they go to the king, and after buttering up the king a bit, they say, they get to the heart of their complaint. They say, there are some Jews, and they're causing problems. They need to be thrown into the fire. And this should make our blood run cold, shouldn't it? This isn't something that's confined to the Bible, after all. Just like we said earlier, this is history. What happened under Nebuchadnezzar happened under the Nazis. Many differences, of course, but that same spirit. Conform or die. And so these 3 men are brought to the king. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And actually our first thought is, where's Daniel? This is called Daniel. He's the leader of the group, isn't he? He's there in chapters 1 and 2 and back in chapters 4, 5, and 6 and so on. What happened here? Did he call in sick? It's a good day to call in sick. But we don't know. Maybe he's on a diplomatic visit. He could be elsewhere. Whatever the case, he's not there. And this just makes it more significant, doesn't it? How are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego going to manage on their own? Because whatever happens, it's a test of them and of Daniel, isn't it? It's a test of Daniel's leadership, of how he's prepared them. It's been said, actually, that this is a window into Christian parenting, this chapter. Not because kids make a big noise and if you don't obey them immediately, then they burst into flames. That's not what I mean. We prepare our children for the world. That's our job, isn't it? To love them and to prepare them for this world, to live for Jesus in this world. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stand before the king, and he gives them another chance. Bow down or die. Worship me or die. And what they say next is one of the most profound, courageous, faith-filled, faith-fueled things that has ever been spoken. And we're not told who says it. In fact, we're told that they say it. I wonder if for the last few hours they've been together deciding what they're going to say, what they're going to come out with to the king, encouraging each other, strengthening each other, giving courage to make this stand. This is what they say together. King Nebuchadnezzar, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Do you remember we talked about wisdom and tact of Daniel last week? Well, they've learned from the best, haven't they? They're completely respectful to the king. They call him king, they call him majesty, and yet they're completely faithful to God. He is able to deliver us, they say. And here comes the earth-shattering second half of the answer. He is able to deliver us, but even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, complete respect. We want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. He is able to deliver us, but he may not. And even if he doesn't, still we worship him. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed is your name. They're words from a great song that we sing here. We're going to sing at the end of the service, actually. How will they worship and serve God when they don't get the life they want? Still, I will say, blessed be your name. And with that, they're thrown into the furnace. Presumably the huge furnace that's been there to melt the gold to cover the statue. Nebuchadnezzar sees being a god as saying, worship me or die. He thinks that's what a god is. It's like the furnace is his idea of hell, isn't it? Worship me or be cast into my hell, into the hell of my making. And yet as he casts them into what he thinks is hell, where do they end up? Sure, they end up in the furnace, but what's it like? Heaven. Isn't it? They're in heaven. Why? Because who's there? Who's with them? Yes, there's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and that's why I've been counting on my fingers all the way through. But there's a fourth person. And the king squints into the flames and says, weren't there 3 men tied up that we threw into the furnace? Now there's 4, and they're walking around, and one looks like a son of the gods. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, you are so close. Do you see the wonderful contrast here? We're told that King Nebuchadnezzar leapt off his feet, off the throne, rather in amazement. But way before the king of Babylon rises from his throne, the king of the world got up off his throne and came down and was with them in the flames. The Son of God stood with them in the path of King Nebuchadnezzar's wrath, among the flames, and all that's burned up are the ropes that bound them. All that the fire does is make them more free. Nothing else is touched. And when they come out, the Bible labors this. It says they don't even smell of smoke, we're told. If you've ever smelt your clothes after a campfire, then that's the real miracle here, isn't it? In Daniel chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar says, kneel and worship me or die. And King Jesus says to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I will be with you in the flames. How will they worship and serve God when they don't have anything like the life that they wanted? They stay faithful. What about us? When the darkness closes in, do we set to work on God's plans, changing them to what we want to see? Or do we stay faithful, knowing that we have a God who is with us in the flames? You see, we don't worship God to get results. We worship God to find His will. We don't worship God to get the results we want to see. We worship Him to see what He wants. We worship a God who went to the cross for us and who walks through the flames with us. We're going to pray now. We're going to use the words of a song to help us pray. As you think about all that Daniel 3 has been saying to us, all that God's been saying to us through these words, use this next song as a time to pray, just to be quiet and to listen and to pray.